Hello, everyone. Welcome back to English in Moments. I'm Elena, and if you're a learner who is past the basics and ready to truly master the art of sophisticated, nuanced conversation, then you've come to the right place. Today, we're going to dive deep into 60 advanced phrases and idiomatic expressions, but with a new level of detail. We won't just learn what they mean, we'll also explore their origins and cultural contexts. Understanding where these phrases come from will not only make them easier to remember, but will also help you use them with perfect precision and timing. This isn't just about memorizing vocabulary. It's about understanding the subtle power of language to express complex ideas, navigate challenging discussions with grace, and build deeper, more meaningful connections. We'll go beyond the obvious and delve into the phrases that native speakers use to sound thoughtful, diplomatic, and genuinely engaged. I'll provide you with real-life, context-rich examples so you can see exactly how to use these phrases with precision. I encourage you to listen to these examples carefully and practice repeating them, paying close attention to the tone and rhythm. So let's get started and transform the way you communicate. Let's begin with phrases that help you share your perspective with confidence and nuance. Instead of a simple "I think," a more advanced way to introduce your opinion, especially in a professional setting, is to say, "from where I stand." Or, "my 2 cents on this is." These expressions frame your perspective as just one of many. The phrase, "my 2 cents," is believed to have originated from the practice of offering a small, humble amount of money, 2 pennies, to contribute to a cause, implying your opinion is a small but sincere contribution to the conversation. For example, in a meeting, you could say, "From where I stand, the Q3 budget seems a bit optimistic given the current market." Or if you're offering an opinion to a friend, you might say, "My 2 cents on this is that you should follow your passion, regardless of the risk." When you want to acknowledge a point but introduce a contrasting idea, you can use, "I see your point, but let me play devil's advocate here." This phrase has a fascinating origin in the Catholic Church, where an official, the advocatus diaboli, would argue against the canonization of a saint to ensure all possible flaws were considered. It signals that you are challenging an idea for the sake of a more thorough discussion, not because you necessarily disagree. For example, a colleague says, "We should launch the product in Q3." You respond, "I see your point, but let me play devil's advocate here. What if our primary competitor launches first?" A professional and honest way to acknowledge you need more time to consider a question is to say, "I hadn't given that much thought." This is a polite way to say, "I don't know," that shows you are taking the query seriously. For instance, a manager asks, "Have you considered the long-term sustainability of this solution?" And you can reply, "I hadn't given that much thought. I'll need to do some research on that." Sometimes a question is so complex that it deserves a pause. A great phrase for this is, "That's a tough one to unpack." This idiom uses the image of a tightly packed bag or box that needs to be carefully opened and sorted, showing you understand the many layers of the topic. As an example, a friend asks you, "What's the best way to handle a toxic work environment?" And you could say, "That's a tough one to unpack because so many factors are at play." When you're trying to describe a situation that is difficult or overwhelming, a great phrase is, "It's a lot to contend with." The word contend means to struggle or compete against something, giving this phrase a sense of resilience in the face of a challenge. For example, a friend asks you how your new job is going, and you can respond, It's been a steep learning curve. Honestly, it's a lot to contend with at the moment. Now that we've covered phrases for giving your opinion, let's practice. In the comments below, try using "from where I stand" or "my 2 cents on this is" to share your opinion on a current event or a recent movie you've seen. Expressing agreement and disagreement is a cornerstone of advanced conversation. Instead of just "I agree," you can use a stronger expression like "that's spot on." This phrase comes from archery, where a spot on shot hits the center of the target, meaning something is exactly correct and perfect. For example, a project manager says, "Our primary focus should be on user experience." You can respond, "That's spot on. Our data indicates that's where we're losing customers." To show that an idea is a complete and satisfying solution, you could say, "That pretty much seals the deal for me." This phrase originates from business and law, where a contract is sealed with a wax stamp to make it official and final. It signals that you are convinced by a point and are ready to make a decision. As an example, a salesperson shows you a car with a great warranty. You say, "The price is good, but the unlimited mileage warranty, that pretty much seals the deal for me." If you're in complete alignment with an idea, you can use the phrase, "You took the words right out of my mouth." This is a great way to show strong agreement and a sense of shared understanding. The phrase suggests you and the other person were thinking the exact same thought at the exact same moment. For instance, a colleague suggests an idea, and you can say, "You took the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to say the exact same thing." When you want to share a different opinion politely, you can introduce it with, "I hear you, but I'm inclined to disagree." This acknowledges their point while clearly stating your own. The word "inclined" gives a subtle, polite tone to your disagreement. For example, a friend says, "The new movie was fantastic." And you can respond, "I hear you, but I'm inclined to disagree. The plot was a bit predictable for my taste." Another way to express disagreement is to say, "I'm not entirely sold on that idea." This is a soft way of saying you have doubts. The phrase uses the image of a salesperson trying to convince a customer to buy or be sold on an idea, and you're indicating that the pitch wasn't quite successful. For instance, a friend pitches a startup idea, and you can say, "It sounds great, but I'm not entirely sold on that idea because the market is so saturated." Now, for your next practice prompt, think about a recent discussion you had with a friend or colleague. How could you have used "I hear you, but I'm inclined to disagree" to be more polite? Advanced speakers use subtle phrases to manage the direction of a conversation. When you want to smoothly change the subject, you can use "to pivot to another topic." The word "pivot" comes from sports like basketball, where a player keeps one foot in place while moving the other, allowing them to change direction quickly and smoothly. For example, in a meeting, you can say, "To pivot to another topic, let's discuss the upcoming presentation." When you need to get back to a previous point in a conversation, you can say, "Going back to what you said earlier." This shows that you were paying attention and wanted to revisit a key point. You could say, "Going back to what you said earlier about the product launch, what are the key risks we need to address?" To politely get someone's attention without being rude, you can say, "If I may just interject for a moment." The word "interject" means to interrupt with something said, and using "if I may" makes the phrase very formal and respectful, perfect for a professional or academic setting. Imagine a formal debate and you can say, "If I may just interject for a moment, I think we're missing a key piece of information. Sometimes a question can be so complex that it deserves a pause. You can use the phrase, "That's a loaded question." The phrase has military origins, referring to a loaded gun or cannon that is prepared to be fired. In conversation, it implies the question is loaded with multiple meanings or hidden intentions that could be difficult to answer directly. For example, a colleague asks, "So, what's your take on the office restructure?" And you can respond, "That's a loaded question. There's a lot to consider." When someone asks you for a favor and you want to say yes, a casual and friendly way to do it is to say, "Consider it done." This promises that you will take care of the task and gives a sense of confidence and finality to your agreement. For instance, your friend asks, "Can you pick up a few things for me from the store?" And you can respond with a smile, "Consider it done." Think about a time you needed to politely interrupt someone in a meeting or a conversation. How could you have used, "If I may just interject for a moment," to make your point? Advanced conversation is not just about what you say, but about how you respond to others. To show that you've been listening and that you understand someone's situation, you can use the phrase, "I hear you loud and clear." This phrase comes from radio and telecommunications, where a clear signal is described as being loud and clear. In conversation, it means you've grasped their message fully and without any static or misunderstanding. For example, a colleague says, "I'm overwhelmed with all the new responsibilities." And you can respond, "I hear you loud and clear. That sounds incredibly stressful." If someone is going through a difficult time, you can show your support with, "I'm here for you." This is a simple but powerful phrase that offers comfort. It implies that your time and support are available to them. For example, a colleague is struggling with a personal issue, and you can say, "I can't imagine what you're going through, but know that I'm here for you if you need anything." When you are asked how you're doing, instead of saying, "I'm fine," you can give a more honest and descriptive response like, "I'm holding my own." This phrase suggests a difficult battle or struggle where you're managing to stay upright and not be defeated. It means you are managing to get by, but it's not easy. For instance, a friend asks, "How's the new job?" And you can say, "It's a lot of work, but I'm holding my own." Now, if you want to express a deep-seated feeling that you can't quite articulate, you can use the phrase, "There's something to be said for that." It shows that you respect their point and believe it has value, even if you don't fully agree. For example, a friend says, "Sometimes it's better to just trust your gut." And you can respond, "There's something to be said for that." When you want to acknowledge someone's help in a formal way, you can say, "Your help has been invaluable." The word invaluable means something is so useful and helpful that its value is impossible to measure. It's a much more advanced way of saying, "Thanks for helping me." For instance, after a team finishes a project, you can say, "Everyone's contribution was important, but your help on the data analysis has been invaluable." For your next practice prompt, think about a time someone was struggling. How could you have used, "I hear you loud and clear" to show empathy and understanding? In professional and academic environments, your choice of words is crucial. Instead of saying, "I'll do my best," you can use the more professional phrase, "I'll give it my best shot." The phrase comes from sports, particularly shooting or archery, and gives a sense of determination and effort. For example, a manager asks, "Can you finish this report by Friday?" And you can say, "I'll give it my best shot," When you need a moment to consider your answer, you can say, I need to think that one through. This is a professional and direct way to show that you are taking a question seriously. For example, a professor asks you a difficult question, and you can say, I need to think that one through and get back to you with a more detailed answer. If you need to change a plan or offer a different option, you can say, how about we table that for now? This is a common idiom from formal meetings and parliamentary procedure where a motion is tabled or put on the table to be discussed later. It means you want to postpone the discussion for a later time. For example, in a meeting, you could say, I know we need to discuss the budget, but let's table that for now and focus on the marketing strategy. When you need to confirm that a plan or idea is acceptable, you can ask, does that work for you? This is a much more professional way of asking, is that okay? It shows that you are being considerate and want to make sure the other person is on board. You can say, we're going to present the project at 2 p.m. Does that work for you? Sometimes you need to acknowledge that a topic is too complex to be discussed at the moment. You can say, that's a discussion for another time. This is a polite way to postpone a difficult conversation. For instance, a colleague brings up a sensitive topic during a busy meeting, and you can say, that's an important point, but given our current agenda, that's a discussion for another time. Consider a time you needed to postpone a conversation in a professional setting. How could you have used, let's table that for now to do so politely? Now let's look at a few more useful phrases. When you agree with a point but with some reservations, you can say, to a certain extent. This is a great way to show a partial agreement. As an example, the author's argument is valid to a certain extent, but it fails to consider the social factors involved. To express that you understand the logic behind an idea, you can say, I can see the merit in that. The word merit means value or worth, so this phrase means you see the good points of an idea. For instance, your boss suggests a new strategy. You can say, I can see the merit in that. The data seems to support a change in direction. If you're in a meeting and everyone agrees, you can say, it looks like we're on the same page. This idiom uses the image of everyone reading the same document or page, signifying that everyone has the same understanding. For example, at the end of a long discussion, you can say, okay, great. It sounds like we're on the same page about the project goals. Another useful professional phrase is let's touch base next week. This phrase comes from baseball, where a runner touches base to be safe. It means to briefly make contact or reconnect with someone. As an example, at the end of a client call, you can say, thanks for the update. Let's touch base next week to see where we're at. When a task needs to be done immediately, you can say, I'll get right on that. The phrase is a direct way to show a sense of urgency and professionalism. For instance, the client needs the report. I'll get right on that. Think about a new idea or project that someone presented to you. In the comments, try using, I can see the merit in that, to give a thoughtful and diplomatic response. Let's continue with phrases that add a touch of professionalism to your everyday conversations. When you want to ask someone's opinion, a more formal way is, what's your take on? The word take here refers to your personal viewpoint or interpretation of something. For example, we've discussed the new proposal, but what's your take on the timeline? If you're having doubts about a decision, you can say, I'm having second thoughts. This phrase expresses that you're reconsidering a choice you've already made. For instance, we've booked the flights, but now I'm having second thoughts about the destination. To express that you should come back to a topic later, you can say, let's circle back to that. The phrase uses the image of returning to a point in a circular path, suggesting you'll return to the topic later. For example, we're running out of time, so let's circle back to that point in our next meeting. When you want to describe an idea as a positive step, you can say, it's a stepping stone. This phrase uses the image of a stone you can step on to cross a stream, symbolizing a small, necessary step that leads to a bigger and better outcome. For instance, this small victory is just a stepping stone to a bigger achievement. If you can't decide between two options, you can say, I'm on the fence. This phrase paints a clear picture of someone sitting on a fence, unable to decide which side to jump down on. It shows that you are undecided. For example, I can't decide between the two job offers. I'm on the fence. When something seems exaggerated or hard to believe, you can say, that's a bit of a stretch. This phrase uses the image of stretching something so far that it might break, suggesting the claim is an exaggeration. For instance, he said he can finish the whole project in one day. That's a bit of a stretch. Think about a decision you had to make recently. Use the phrase, I am on the fence, to describe a moment of indecision. Advanced English is full of idioms. To suggest that something isn't a priority, you can say, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This phrase warns against making a decision too quickly or prematurely. For example, we have a great idea, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still need to run the numbers. If a point is not relevant to the main discussion, you can say, that's besides the point. This is a great way to keep a conversation on track. For instance, a friend brings up an unrelated topic. You say, I know, but that's besides the point. We need to focus on what we're doing for dinner. When you can't remember something, you can say, I'm drawing a blank. This phrase is believed to have originated from a lottery system or a written test, where drawing a blank meant getting no prize or not being able to fill in the answer. For example, I can't remember her name. I'm drawing a blank. If a situation is completely different from what you're used to, you can say, that's a whole different ballgame. The idiom comes from sports, where a new game or ball game has completely different rules and circumstances. For instance, working from home is challenging. The office environment was one thing, but this is a whole different ballgame. To express that you don't like something, a more polite way to say it is, it's not my cup of tea. This is a classic British idiom that uses the image of someone's personal preference for tea. It's a gentle way to express dislike without being harsh. For example, I'm not a big fan of horror movies. It's not my cup of tea. When you want to start a serious discussion, you can say, let's get down to business. The phrase has a straightforward professional connotation, signaling that it's time to stop small talk and begin work. For instance, thank you all for coming. Now let's get down to business. Try to think of something you recently forgot. How could you have said, I'm drawing a blank to describe it? Let's look at some phrases for different contexts. When you need to clarify something, a professional way to do it is just to clarify. For example, just to clarify, we're presenting at 10 a.m. and not 11 a.m. To summarize something, you can say, in a nutshell. The idiom uses the image of something small enough to fit inside a nutshell, implying a concise and brief summary. For instance, so in a nutshell, the meeting was productive and we're moving forward with a new plan. If you need to get an opinion from your team, you can say, let's run it by the team. This phrase uses the image of running an idea past others for their feedback. For example, that's a great idea. Let's run it by the team to get their thoughts. To inform someone that you'll keep them updated, a good phrase is, I'll keep you in the loop. This idiom uses the image of an information loop, suggesting you'll include them in the ongoing exchange of information. For instance, I'll have a meeting with the client this afternoon. I'll keep you in the loop. When a situation is beneficial for everyone, you can say, it's a win-win situation. This phrase, popular in business and negotiation, implies that all parties involved will benefit. For example, if we work together, we can save time and money. It's a win-win situation for everyone. If you're very busy, a more professional way to say it is, we've got a lot on our plate. The idiom uses the image of a plate overflowing with food, representing an abundance of tasks. For instance, I can't go to dinner tonight. I've got a lot on my plate. To end a work day, you can say, let's call it a day. The phrase implies that the day's work is finished. For example, it's 5 p.m. and we've been working hard. Let's call it a day. When you want to politely decline an invitation, you can say, I'll take a rain check. This phrase originated from baseball, where a rain check was a ticket given to fans to attend a game at a later date if the original game was canceled due to rain. For instance, thanks for the invite, but I can't make it. I'll take a rain check. If you need time to make a decision, you can say, I'll sleep on it. This phrase uses the idea of sleeping on it to give your mind time to process the information and come to a better decision. For example, I'm not sure if I should buy a new car. I'll sleep on it. When you're not sure about the details of a plan, you can say, let's play it by ear. This idiom comes from music, where a musician plays by ear without sheet music or improvises. It means you'll decide on the details as you go. For instance, we don't have to plan the whole trip now. Let's play it by ear. Now for your final practice prompt in this section. In a nutshell, what is the best advice you've ever received? Let's finish with some final powerful phrases. When you agree with a point that is exactly correct, you can say, you've hit the nail on the head. This phrase comes from carpentry, where a single accurate hit on a nail makes the process much more efficient. It means you've identified the exact problem or point. For example, you've said it perfectly. You've hit the nail on the head. If something is easy to understand, you can say, it's not rocket science. This modern idiom refers to the complexity of rocket science and is used to say that something is simple. For instance, don't worry, it's easy to use this program. It's not rocket science. To summarize a long story, you can say, long story short. This is a very common phrase to get to the main point quickly. For example, so, long story short, we ended up having a great time at the party. To stop a problem before it gets worse, you can say, let's nip it in the bud. The idiom comes from gardening, where you nip or pinch off a small bud to prevent it from growing into a larger, unwanted plant. For instance, I think there's a misunderstanding. Let's nip it in the bud before it becomes a bigger issue. When you find a positive aspect in a difficult situation, you can say, that's a silver lining. This phrase refers to the silver lining of a cloud, symbolizing a positive aspect that can be found even in a negative situation. For example, I lost my job, but that's a silver lining because now I have time to travel. To let someone know you'll contact them later, you can say, I'll be in touch. This is a professional and common phrase to promise a future communication. For instance, thank you for the interview. I'll be in touch in the next few days. When you want to work together to find a solution, you can say, let's put our heads together. This idiom uses the image of two people leaning their heads together to focus on a problem. For example, we need to solve this problem. Let's put our heads together. For our final practice prompt, think about a small misunderstanding you've had. In the comments, tell me how you could have used let's nip it in the bud to solve it quickly. So there you have it, 60 powerful phrases to make your English more advanced and effective. Remember, the goal of advanced English is not to sound complicated, but to sound precise. These phrases will help you navigate complex social and professional situations with grace and confidence. Practice these by using them in your conversations, writing them in emails, or simply by repeating them to yourself. The most important thing is to move from passive learning to active application. Try taking one or two of these phrases each week and find a way to use them in a real-life conversation. Pay attention to how native speakers use these phrases and try to mimic their intonation and timing. Every small effort you make brings you closer to your fluency goal. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to our channel, English in Moments, for more conversation tips, listening practice, and vocabulary building. I'm Elena, and it's always a pleasure to help you grow your English step by step. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep practicing and keep speaking.